Welcome back, everybody. Today we have a post-balance patch Rta tier list. Unlike the last tier list, we're not going to just place each and every single one because that's going to take forever. So what we're going to do instead is kind of discuss each of the tiers, what the traits or the characteristics of some of the characters in the tier are, and then explain maybe a few highlights, a character or two that you may want to invest in, and then move on from there. If you have any other questions about the characters or why they're good or bad, feel free to join the Discord or ask in the comment section below. I'm sure myself or anyone else in the comments will want to talk to you about it because, wow, everyone loves talking about tier lists. Okay, let's get into it. So with the Cleave tier list, there's a couple characters here that are varying or have varying strengths. To put a lot of the Cleave characters in their own list is not only kind of difficult, it's kind of unnecessary. Because characters like Flan, Emma Rowana, Commander Pavel, Ashley Mentor, Elena, they may be decent or they may be more usable in everyday RTA. But ultimately, if you don't have the units built for them, they aren't usable at all. Now, that isn't even talking about the other characters where you can't just really pick a character like Vildred out of nowhere. You can't just really pick a character like Fire Shuri out of nowhere. So that's why it just makes more sense for us to have a Cleave tier or like a Cleave section. And these are the characters that are featured in them. We have Flan, we have Emma Rowana, Ida, Commander Pavel, Ashley Mentor, and Jacko. Jacko is probably the best of these kind of characters that are available alongside the Commander Pavel. You'll notice that Sid isn't here and he's in another part, but a lot of the speed imprints are very good, especially when you're racing or when you're trying to outspeed the enemy opponent. A couple of characteristics of this category, however, though, are one-shotting everything. They set you up, they give you combat readiness push, these characters will debuff, they'll give you buffs. And long story short, if you have the ability to or you want to try and play these characters, you can, but just keep in mind that it is a completely different playstyle than probably 99% of other RTA or other real-time arena gameplay experiences. If you're playing with characters like Emma Rowana or Summertime Iseria or with the Summer Break Charlotte, a lot of these characters will require you to have a completely different roster, a completely different set of gear that you need, a load of different artifacts. With that being said, here's the section. If you're curious about it, you can also watch all the other videos or maybe watch me live. Haha, casual plug. If you want to see how to cleave with these characters, most of them that I use anyways. But the next section that we have is obviously the counter Cleave list, which obviously contrasts the Cleave list. And a really funny note about the counter Cleave list is that it's really small, but despite it being small, it still normally beats the crap out of all the Cleave characters. So we have characters like Celine, Kayron, Sage Ball, Bloodblade Karen, Mercedes, and of course, Rockman himself, Eaton. All these characters do something to either punish a non-attack skill, they punish combat readiness push, they're tanky, they add evasion, they counter. Typical traits of a team that wants to just blow up someone that's playing with a very, very squishy team composition. So Bloodblade Karen obviously can't really be stripped unless if you have, Veronica. Armin prevents, single target damage being abused as easily. You have Fat Cat or Assassin Cartusia, who gives us evasion, and you have all the other characters that use something like Secret Art Storm, like the Celines, or you have Kayron, who can counter and go immortal. All these characters are really, really good for countering Cleave units, but like with Cleave, you play a completely different game. It is unlike anything you've ever seen. You have different gear, you have different pick priority. Like if you look at a match that has counter Cleave, it looks completely different than any other match in RTA. There's very rarely a properly drafted composition when you have the Cleave versus anti-Cleave comp, and it looks really goofy and bad, and then the game is over in about 30 seconds. Anyways, if I were to suggest a character for you to build, and I forgot this about the Cleave section, but if you were curious about who you should build from either the Cleave or the counter Cleave section, I would probably say for the Cleave section, building characters like Ida, Commander Pavel, Summertime Assyria, and Jacko would be really good. Whereas for counter Cleave, I would definitely suggest picking up either a Bloodblade Karen, a Sage Ball, or maybe a Mercedes. These are characters that are pretty low investment, or they're not as difficult to build, and you probably have access to them and will find more useful for them outside of something that you're doing for just RTA. So with that in mind, those are the characters that you can kind of invest in, at least for counter Cleave. Let's move on. Okay, so the next thing that we have here is the niche tier list, and these are characters that have some usage as obviously noted by the name, but generally speaking, they are too difficult to play, or you're generally speaking picking these characters because you like them or you feel like you have found like a really odd situation in draft where you're not sure what you can pick, or you're missing a character, so then you end up picking the character or one of these characters instead. That list includes characters like Abigail, Alencia, Benimaru, Shu, Dark Corvus, Amelia, you know, Rem and stuff like that. There are obviously characters in here that are also pretty good, i.e. like there's Rwana and stuff like that. But even despite them being strong in their certain niches, Rwana obviously against characters like Solitaria and against characters, you know, that counterattack or do extra attacks, these characters are still pretty niche. You don't really get to use them as often or as frequently. And generally speaking, if people are playing any of the characters that are above this, you likely won't see many of these characters very often or at all. Around or within this tier list, you'll also see characters like Diane, you'll see Senya, you'll see Roy, you'll see Carrot and Inos. Again, characters that definitely can be used, and it's not impossible to win with them, but in terms of the investment, in terms of knowing how to play with them, in terms of what kind of gear you need for them, these are definitely characters that you will probably put tertiary or focus on after you've built a lot of the characters in the higher tiers. Again, not to say that they aren't bad, but in terms of whether or not you would have these characters built, or if you should build the characters, kind of tough to say. Most of these characters can probably be a hard pass, and if in like the 1 in every 30 games you don't have one of these characters and they end up being the perfect spot or the perfect pick for the spot in draft that you're in, then great. Terrific, you know, you got to pick the Carrot or you got to pick Senya. That's terrific. But nowadays, people don't really pick like this, and some of the niche characters almost even border on being anti-cleave options. So keep that in mind when you're building the characters. However, characters that I would suggest that you try out or build from the niche tier list are probably Rwana. I would probably also have gear on Elena. I also think that Fairy Tail Tenebria is really strong if people don't respect your speed, as well as a character like Dark Corvus, because sometimes there are moments where people just forget to build damage, or they try to play like a really low damage composition, and Dark Corvus can save you. The other characters obviously punish like a very specific niche or something that comes up often. Like if people aren't respectful of the fact that Rwana exists, someone picking something like Solitaria plus Emma Landy kind of just get punished by Rwana, or can be punished by Rwana, or get punished a little bit, countered a little bit by it. So keep that in mind when you're choosing what the characters to build. Next tier that we have is Decent, and arguably some of the characters from Decent can be a niche and bounce back and forth, vice versa. This is kind of the middle ground of where you could see a lot of characters being played, or maybe you see them a little more frequently. This tier list, or this section specifically, is a bit more biased just based on your experience, anecdotally what you've seen. So a couple of the characters that you'll see in here, there's Sharoon, there's Arya, there's Amid, there's 8-Pac, there's Faithless Lidica, there's Landy, Milim, etc. Now again, some of these characters you can argue are a niche. I could definitely, for instance, see a character like Amid or maybe Bihu be in the niche, but I've definitely been seeing them a little bit more across like the different, I guess, like players that I've seen playing, or the different team compositions that I've been fighting against. So with that in mind, this is the Decent tier list, but these are the kind of characters that you'll probably see a little more frequently, or again, like, you know, more anecdotally, I've seen more frequently. They're pretty decent. They have a definite good position, or you could build around them and build like a pretty good composition to punish players or to play a specific playstyle. One that comes to mind is with Faithless Lidica. Certain players will play Faithless Lidica plus Sid and Commander Pavel, stuff like that. That was a playstyle that I myself played, and I like made a whole video on it. For characters like Little Queen Charlotte, because of the increase in dark units, we have characters like Little Queen Charlotte coming back. Milim is always nice on occasion against evasion characters, or against grass or Yulha, etc., or characters that just need to be extincted. Rimuru is also here. Again, you could also argue him being a niche, but he kind of punishes people that use or don't really run too much immunity, or people that have buffs before attacking. I know people will sometimes pick this character into Emma Landy to kind of steal the anti-crit, but that's kind of this tier list. Strays, or in terms of characters that you might want to invest in, I think that characters like Strays, Emma Landy, Faithless Lidica, if you can afford to build them and you're fast enough, Designer Lilibit, and I think also probably Zahak, are characters that are pretty worthwhile to look at when it comes to this tier. Strays is great at, you know, dealing with tanks or with one-shotting things. But the reason why Strays specifically isn't in the stronger OP tier is because it kind of depends on who you're picking. One-shotting someone like LRK is pretty doable with Strays, but sometimes people will have Karina, or they'll have Holy Sack Arrowell, and it kind of ruins it, which is why, again, It's not that they're bad, it's that there's sometimes people that are prepared for what you're trying to do with the characters, which is why they're not foolproof, they're not like OP, or they're not giga strong. So I put them in a decent tier list. Same thing with a character like Landy. Sometimes you think that Landy will proc Guiding Light, and then she doesn't, and then you burn your account. Anyways, moving along, we have the strong tier. Something really interesting about the strong tier, and again, maybe I should have explained it a little bit earlier. A lot of this is just based off of what I've seen. This tier list, and most tier lists, all tier lists in general, are number one, either dumb or, you know, just interaction farms, or number two, they are biased and they're just based on your experience. So this is what I've noticed, specifically with strong. As you can see, a lot of people, or as the tier list shows, a lot of people are liking to play or enjoying Death Dealer Ray. There's still a healthy balance of Pillis. There's still a lot of Knockwall, Destina, ML Shu, there's Ed, ML Ken. This is the tier that people complement the units in OP with. You'll pick knights or supportive characters or DPS or counter picks here. For instance, someone may be playing Desert Jewel Bazaar or something, and then someone will play Destina to counter it. Some people will try to cleave, and then someone will pick Ed in order to counter it. Or if someone is trying to play Faithless Litica but doesn't have enough damage, an Ed or maybe a martial artist can come out. There are a load of different reasons for why you would pick characters from this tier, but ultimately it boils down to being complementary or having less weaknesses than any of the characters in decent or below, while also complementing the OP tier very well. Shuna and Solitaria, or Shuna and Famir, in my opinion, are also up here just because of the new the sleep change. Famir herself, I'm sure you guys have seen how kind of overloaded and disgusting her kit is. Sleep is already kind of broken just with the change by itself, but if you add either, you know, a heal or a defense break or extra fixed damage, whatever you want to call it, or whatever it is, to a kit, it's kind of strong. The healing was obviously for Shuna, but Shuna in theory with her kit is also really strong. She gets to strip, and that one's on command, and it puts everyone to sleep. She gets to heal, or she gets to redistribute health with her S2, and also heal on S1. People run her at like a pretty decent speed, and they have a Turnus on to cut stuff, or maybe they run her on Shamadra or Ice Guardian Crystal or a Guardian Ice Crystal. Any of these things are nice. Rand is also nice for people that are trying to disrespect or don't pick things that kind of rival his speed. Another character in this list, Architect Leica, is really good for one-shotting teams that have Spectre Tenebria and stuff, or that want to just eliminate one single threat. But in contrast, and the reason why she's kind of kept in strong tier as opposed to OP tier is because you have characters like Rand that can just S2, S3, and now your Architect Leica has no head. Anyways, Pillis and Death Dealer Ray are also kind of new to the tier, and they are kind of fresh and hot off of, you know, I guess like flavor of the month testing, or like just like balance patch change. However, I still think that even with it being kind of early in or early on, there's a ton of play for these characters. People are picking them, I think, at an even more insane rate. So Pillis has a 35% play rate, which is extremely high relative to everything else, while also boasting a pretty high win rate. I think it was 52 if I'm not mistaken. And I can't find Death Dealer Ray, but Death Dealer Ray should also be up here. There he is. So Death Dealer Ray also has a 36% win rate. They're picked a lot. They're quite strong. Their play rate and their win rate is pretty high. And probably the most controversial, questionable kind of section or kind of character that we have here is probably going to be the Sid. And if you haven't seen like the 300 shorts that I've already done when it comes to Sid, he's strong. There's no getting around it. He's very strong. It is a very intoxicating feeling to be the Sid player, but it is also extremely demoralizing and depressing to play against Sid. Sid complements Knockwall really well, and I like them both together I like them both together. Sid and Knockwall are also really strong together with Famir, and because of the new change that RTA has where you can't really know who you're playing against, and you can't really get banned out per se, it's really nice to be able to try and force Knockwall and Famir and kind of have that combo together while still being really strong if you only end up having Knockwall and Sid together by themselves. And so with the strong tier, there's obviously an argument to be made for building all of these characters because we're kind of hitting the part of the tier list where all these characters are really strong, but I definitely think that building characters like Destina, Death Dealer Ray would be pretty worthwhile. Pillis is a 3-star, so assuming you can get her special change done, it's probably worthwhile for you. If you are a Giga Lilius enjoyer like I am, you should also probably invest in Gala Lilius because it deals with a lot, and I mean a lot, of the OP tier characters. And Kawazu, Karina, also usual suspects that are great at countering certain niches while also just being generally strong. These are kind of characters I think are pretty worthwhile. A lot of you guys probably already have characters like Karina and Gala Lilius already mulleted and invested in. But if you don't, this is your sign, or this is your PSA to invest in them as well. Kawazu, I think most people know, is really strong for fighting against Candy or ML Landy at this point. But also, if you haven't invested him as well, make sure to do so today. And finally, we are at the OP tier list. So this is the cream of the crop, what you were probably waiting for this whole time, and that is the OP characters. So as you see at the top, we have Briar Witch Iceria, who I think, especially after all the changes, the balance patch, the buffs, the nerfs, etc. No nerfs, of course, because why would that exist? But after all the buffs have come out, I think that the character, or the Moonlight 5-star that stands out on top, actually this is all characters, the character that stands out on top is Briar Witch Iceria, and for a number of reasons. Before we get into the what exactly happens or what exactly defines the OP tier, let me just describe what Briar Witch Iceria does. She strips everything with the Soulburn Ignore ER. She unbuffables with the same skill. She has an 85% chance, I believe, to defense break. She stops revives. She herself has immortality. She has built-in hit chance. She has a death break on S1, and she is also a ranger, so you can run her on either Guiding Light or Andre's crossbow or a symbol of, Misha's artifact. So that's eight good things about why you should build Briar Witch Iceria, and she tops the top of the list. However, the characteristic, or what makes the OP characters OP, is primarily how flexible or how usable they are, and how oftentimes they're just clutch. And what I mean by that is that you may not pick them, you may not always pick them in the first or second slot. You may end up picking some of these characters in 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. However, the really strong, or like the really great thing about a lot of these characters is that their kits are not foolproof, but they're kind of like dummy checks. And what I mean by that is that at the very low, or at the very bottom end of things, you could probably use these characters and you'll do fine. Spectre Tenebria's S3 does a load of damage. Candy by herself is going to counter a lot. But the thing that makes these characters OP is that they, when piloted by like the right players, or when you are very familiar with the game, they become much stronger, and they become much more overwhelming to deal with. A character like Angel of Light probably doesn't do anything if you have no idea what you're doing. Same thing with Lua. But in the hands of, you know, some better RTA players, or people that know the potential of characters like Lua, LRK, Arrowell, these characters are just suffocating to play against. Lua resets you, Angel of Light unbuffables and silences you, gets to push you back so you never get to press your skills. Conquer Lilius applies attack down to everyone on your team, gives vigor, has provoke, has a dual attack on S1. Candy is Candy. And of course, with the rest of these characters, they do something that a lot of the other characters don't do. Characters like Mediator Cowrick have, I think it's 2 or 3 turn immunity and attack buff, which is insane. Lone Crescent Bologna is also here, recently changed after her buff, and I think she definitely deserves to be in the OP tier now, just because of how usable she is into Candy, or Emma Landy, who I'd probably argue is one of the stronger characters, especially for this current RTA meta season thing that we're in. Pair that with the fact that now you only need 5 hits to be taken total for her to activate her S2, and having a pretty strong Soulburn S1 now, I think Emma Bologna definitely deserves to be up here. Lionheart Cermia is great against a lot of the counter characters as well. And of course, your usual suspects for Knights, you have LRK and Arrowell, who kind of dominate the meta because they either one-shot the whole team, or they stun one character and have like a guaranteed Aureus or something built into the kit. Both of these things are really strong while also providing great mitigation. And all of that aside, we still have a couple of debuffers, like I mentioned with Angel of Light, Lua, the Zio, who are pretty debilitating, or are kind of the must-pick characters if you are trying to, let's say, cleave, or if you're trying to play quickly. Nowadays, especially with Zio, if you don't pick Zio, you are either forcing yourself to Zio trap, which is picking characters that Zio has to hit turn 1, or you have to pick, you know, a really weird composition to deal with him. More likely than not, though, you're probably going to pick a character like Zio and Spectre Tenebria into Zio, or Lua Inspector Tenebra into Zio, but he still deserves to be there up at the top just because he has so much access, or he has so much free stat, and he pretty much guaranteed takes turn 1 while also debuffing with the skill 3. If I were to be completely honest with you guys, the OP tier has a load of great characters, and I understand a lot of these characters vary between MLs or ML 3-star, 4-star, 5-star. However, with the state of E7, it is unfortunate to admit this, but the game is extremely Moonlight heavy right now. There are characters that are strong, of course. You know, you have characters like Sid that are bonkers. You have Lua. With all that being said, a lot of the characters in OP tier are still really worth investing in or building. And unfortunately, with the way that the meta is panning out right now, unless if a character like specially changed Christie or something else gets changed up in the future with Litica or something to that extent, we are probably going to be seeing a lot of these characters for the rest of the season to come. I'll probably make an update maybe for this at the end of the season, or when things start picking up again, when stuff starts changing, or if they announce new characters. However, this is going to be the post-balance patch RTA tier list. Wow, that's PBP RTA tier list. That's what I'm gonna call it. Okay, PBP RTA tier list. That's gonna be it for this tier list though, guys. If you enjoyed, make sure to like, comment, turn the notification bell, subscribe. Let me know what you think of this tier list. If you learned something, I would appreciate it if you would also follow the rest of my socials and the rest of my platforms. Please be civil. I am begging you. Please be civil. Don't call each other bad names and bad words. It is okay. It is okay to disagree. We can agree to disagree. Yes, we are trying to discuss the tier list, and we are trying to figure out more about things. If you think that a character deserves to be above, up, down, left, right, center on the tier list, that's totally fine. You're more than welcome to discuss it or have your own opinion. Let's keep it civil though, guys, even though I know this will not be civil. Anyways, I'll see you guys on the next one. Adios.